There are always corrections in a bull market. That's probably where we are now. Most of the Bitcoin holders and investors would actually want to buy more, particularly at discount, but they don't have money left. Ideally, bilateral zero tariffs, so you have free trade zone. That would actually be good for the global economy, I think.
Firstly, Trump's tariffs last week. Very big impact across the markets. We saw conventional stocks go down. Bitcoin held up fairly well. What was your initial reaction to that? Was it surprising to see that Bitcoin decoupled from conventional stocks for a few days at least?
Well, I think people, when they talk about coupling, they're talking about very short term, like over like a year or two. Then Bitcoin has fully decoupled because it's gone up, 5 or 6 times in the last since the bottom of the market, right, 2 years ago, But it was interesting that the stock markets usually don't expect that much volatility day to day. Like 1% starts to worry them, and they saw, like 5-10% movements within a few days. So that was very worrying for them. But for Bitcoin, 1% is just another Tuesday of like volatility, right? Even 5% is like fairly normal. And of course, the weekends are thinner trading for Bitcoin, and most of the Bitcoin investors are all in, so they don't have much cash left to buy dips, whereas public market stocks, by comparison, there are people with capital who are reallocating. They'll sell one stock and buy another, so they do have liquidity to buy what they think is a cheap price. So I think most of the Bitcoin holders and investors would actually want to buy more, particularly at discount. But they don't have the money left. And so particularly on a weekend, that makes it a little difficult. I think you've seen entities like BlackRock, because they're not, I believe they're not buying for themselves, but they're buying on behalf of people buying the ETF, but they're also starting to buy on behalf of managed funds that their fund managers do. And so you see those funds, I think, absorbing some of the dips as well. And the ETF buyers are sticky, so they're longer term, they're less prone to panic sell, and they won't have leverage or not much if they do. So I think Bitcoin did quite well, over the tariff drama. Now, generally the economic theory of comparative advantage is that tariffs are a bad thing. They're friction in free trade, and free trade is good for, the trading parties, definitionally, right? So, but it's partly some game theory where the Trump administration is trying to push other countries to reduce their tariffs. And so if that's successful, that the US drops or reduces tariffs and the other countries drop or reduce tariffs, so that is, ideally bilateral zero tariffs, so you have free trade zone, that would actually be good for the global economy, I think. So we'll see where it lands, because at the moment it's a bit of a negotiation, pull and push, right? So it's not that clear where it's going to shake out.
With the amount of uncertainty there is in the world right now, do you think there couldn't be a better reason to buy Bitcoin or to hold Bitcoin or to understand the idea of Bitcoin, just given how crazy everything seems?
Yeah, well, Bitcoin is a scarce hard asset, and it's, a lot of things, the news flow that should be indicative of a positive future for Bitcoin, long-term and, mid-term, short-term, is very robust. You've got a lot of regulations that have been improved in the US, and it's starting to improve in other countries. You've got the SEC approved the Bitcoin ETF in the previous year, and now you have the US, the new administration, removing a lot of friction regulations that were frankly anti-Bitcoin. So removing those, so now it become easy for banks to provide service to Bitcoin companies. And indeed, the US government themselves are talking positively about building a Bitcoin reserve. So personally, I'm more interested to see individuals buy Bitcoin, but the fact that the US government is talking favorably about Bitcoin sort of legitimizes it for traditional finance. And of course, we are immersed in it, so we are, find that confusing. But for fund managers at pension funds and managed funds like mutual funds, which ultimately end users' money and savings, they would view that as a reduction in risk. And so then, with access to the ETFs, they can start to invest in funds or recommend Bitcoin allocations to their clients. So that's still really early stages, right? And you see also a couple of, there are a few sovereign wealth funds with Bitcoin positions, but they're still very small. Like they're, less than 0.5% for some. I mean, even though, like, I think one of the Abu Dhabi funds invested about 450 million, but it's like 10 basis points, because those are very large funds. It's not that much money to them, right?
When does game theory really start to play out? When the US actually says, hey, we're going to buy Bitcoin as well? Because they've kind of just said we're going to hold what we have through the seizures that they've done in the past. But when they say we're actively buying Bitcoin, is that when everyone else starts scrambling? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to project because there's politics involved and processes, like approval processes for different branches of government that are, have to approve things. But I think it's good enough if they just hold the Bitcoin that they have, because that gives the individual more time to buy Bitcoin, at this kind of price level, and more time. So I think of the ETFs as access. So there are definitely people who are not comfortable with the technology of creating an exchange account, buying Bitcoin and storing it in a wallet and so on. And so for them, the way they've interacted with investments is they call their broker. And so that's now possible with the ETFs. And so I think if the US government doesn't, go on a buying spree and buy 1 million Bitcoin over the next 5 years, that gives more time for the new entrants who've got access finally through brokers and through the ETFs to build up a Bitcoin position, right? And typically those investors are not putting in new money, they reallocate from a portfolio, right? So they've got some kind of managed or advised portfolio. So I think they have the opportunity to do that. So if the US government itself is slow or doesn't ultimately invest in Bitcoin, that's fine to me. People buy Bitcoin at the price deserve, and I think the US government could afford to pay more, basically.
My last question to you, in December 2023, we had a conversation about the impact of the halving. And back then you said to me, we might see the top of the bull run 18 months after the halving. It's been a year. Yeah. A lot has changed since then, some things that no one would have expected happening. Right. Have you readjusted your kind of forecasting? Where do you see the price of Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin going in the next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in the bull market. There are always corrections in a bull market. Typically, there'll be like half a dozen, 30% drops in a bull market. So I think that's probably where we are now. And I think, if you look at the news flow, there's a lot of positive improvements in regulations, in financial institutions making announcements, and presumably a number of things going on behind the scenes where they're not talking about what they're doing, like the sovereign wealth funds. So now is probably an opportunity, and I think some of it's happening that the managed funds are buying the dip, as it were. So just bear that in mind if you get the idea to sell, because Bitcoin is, under 100,000, you're selling, to other users, other investors via ETFs, and they're hoovering up, the Bitcoin as it outflow, what would have outflowed from ETFs ends up being bought in some cases by the managed funds.